Shalom and welcome back to another class of weekly Torah Talks, where we share timely Torah messages relevant both to the Jerusalem Holy Temple and to your lives. I'm your host Shlomo, and today we have a very important topic. This week's Torah portion is Parshat Vayak'hel, the Torah portion which speaks about the building of the tabernacle, the Mishkan. We also will read the third of the so-called Arba Parshiot, that is, an approximately 4-week period when, in addition to the regular Torah reading, a second Torah scroll is brought to read one of 4 special Torah portions relating to the current Hebrew months of Adar and of Nisan. We've already read in the past the first portion called Parshat Shkalim, which spoke about the half shekel donation. We've also read the second of the 4 parshios, of the 4 portions, and had a class on it linked here, which was called Parshat Zachor, which spoke about remembering what Amalek did to us as we left Egypt and our obligation to eliminate them in due time. This week, we will read Parshat Parah, the Torah section in the book of Bamidbar, or Numbers, chapter 19, that speaks about the red heifer, a reddish-brown cow that is slaughtered and burned, and whose ashes are used to purify one who became spiritually impure through contact with a dead person. This subject excites many of our followers, as we see from all the emails and comments that we receive about the topic. In this class, we have 2 goals. One, to explain exactly what the red heifer is and is not, its procedure, and its connection to the upcoming festival of Passover, or Pesach, and 2, to bring a message from the red heifer that can positively affect our lives. With all that said, I have to start cleaning for Passover, so let's see if we could cover all the points in the next 8 minutes. Many of our followers ask, when will the red heifer be offered so that temple services can begin? Let's start with saying this. The red heifer is not an offering. An offering is an animal, and in some cases, a bird, flower, or even wood that is brought upon the altar in the Beit HaMikdash complex. However, the red heifer is brought elsewhere. As described in Parshat Parah, the verse says, "And you shall give it," meaning the red heifer, "to Elazar the Kohen, and he shall take it outside the camp and slaughter it in his presence." Notice the words outside the camp. Our sages explain this to mean outside the 3 camps of Israel, which in Jerusalem temple terms means outside of the entire Temple Mount complex. To my right, you could see a visual of the Temple Mount complex to get a feel for what I'm talking about. The next verse states, "Elazar the Kohen shall take from its blood with his finger and sprinkle it towards the front of the tent of meeting 7 times. In Jerusalem temple terms, the tent of meeting is equivalent to the entrance to the sanctuary, in Hebrew the Heichal, located here on the map. So, if on the one hand, we must be outside the Temple Mount, but on the other hand, we must also face the front of the sanctuary, where could a Kohen have stood in order to fulfill both requirements? There's only one place, here, on the mountain that faces opposite the entrance of the sanctuary, the Mount of Olives. Clearly, the red heifer was not an offering, but a different animal altogether, pun intended. The procedure of bringing the red heifer went as follows. The Kohanim would lead the red heifer from the Temple Mount through its eastern gate, known as the Gate of Shushan. After exiting the Temple Mount, the Kohanim and members of the Sanhedrin, the high court whose hearings convened on the Temple Mount, led the red heifer on a massive bridge that connected the Temple Mount to the Mount of Olives. There, on the Mount of Olives, a Kohen would slaughter the red heifer with his right hand and receive its blood with his left hand. He then dips his right finger into the blood in the palm of his left hand and sprinkles it towards the entrance of the sanctuary as described above. He would repeat this dipping and sprinkling process for a total of 7 times. The Kohen then lights the red heifer on fire. After that, the Kohen takes cedar wood, hyssop, and red dyed wool, binds them all together, and throws them into the fire as well. This creates the ash of the red heifer. The ash of this mixture will be used to create water known as mei chata, purification waters, which would be used to purify people from spiritual impurity due to contact with a corpse. This spiritual impurity is known in Hebrew as tumat mate and will be referred to as so for the rest of this class. Because of the significance of these ashes, the ashes were kept in 3 containers that were located in 3 different locations. One container by the Vayak'hel, a section of the temple complex just inside the area that the Jews with Tumat Mate cannot enter. Another by the Mount of Olives, and the third and final container was divided up further into 24 groups for the 24 Kohanic families who would serve in the Beit HaMikdash on a weekly rotation. To create the purification waters, water from a spring was drawn and placed in a container. This spring water was known as Mayim Chayim, literally living waters. Ash was then placed in the living waters to create the purification waters. I'll note that there was no minimum of the ash to living waters ratio, meaning even a tiny amount of ash can turn a large pool of water into purification water as long as it was contained within a vessel. One who wanted to purify him or herself of tumat mate would go to a Kohen on the 3rd and 7th days of his or her impurity. A pure Kohen would then take a hyssop branch and dip it into the container that held the purification waters and sprinkle that water onto the person who wished to be purified. After the sprinkling of the 7th day, the impure person would immerse in a ritual bath known as a mikvah and be considered purified once the sun sets that evening. Although anyone who wants to enter certain areas of the Temple Mount or eat the meat of certain offerings must be spiritually pure of tumat mate, our sages tell us that this Torah portion of the red heifer is especially relevant to Pesach, since on Pesach all of the Jewish people must be pure in order that each one of them can eat of the Paschal lamb, the Korban Pesach, which is an explicit Torah commandment. Therefore, this portion is read specifically in one of the weeks leading up to Pesach. When learning about the procedure of creating the purification waters via the red heifer, one cannot help but wonder what in the world does some burnt cow ash together with a concoction of natural herbs have to do with making us pure of spiritual impurity? The whole thing leaves us scratching our heads in wonder. I once heard a great teaching from Rabbi Uri Shirky, chairman of Brit Olam, the Noahide World Center, that helps us answer this question. He says that first we must take a step back and explore the concept of Tumat Mate and its purification in general. Death at first sight seems like a permanent thing. One day you're alive, full of energy, saying shalom to the camera. The next day, you're dead. All growth stops, and there's a feeling of never-ending darkness. It seems like life is a one-way street. You can only die. You can't die and then become alive again. The concept of purification from ritual impurity teaches us otherwise. The very fact that we can change ourselves from impure, that is connected to death, to pure, meaning connected exclusively to life, suggests that death is but a temporary state, and in truth, life is something more constant and more lasting for the future. This idea is expressed profoundly vis-a-vis the very strange process of creating the purification waters via the red heifer. Let's start with the red heifer itself. In ancient times, a cow was very connected to a person's life. An ox, on the one hand, will never have offspring, while a cow produces offspring, gives milk, and its hide can be used for leather. It was a very resourceful animal for its owner. The heifer is specifically red, and red is the color of blood and therefore explained to be a symbol of life. This red heifer, a symbol of life of the animal kingdom, is mixed with a branch from a cedar tree. The cedar tree is in fact the largest of all trees in the Middle East. We also take the hyssop which is the smallest of all trees in the Middle East. On top of this dynamic, we add in red dyed wool, which in Hebrew is called tolat shani. The word tolat literally means worm, which is the smallest of all insects. So all of life, from one of the largest to smallest animals and from the largest and smallest plant life, is burned together. It all becomes ash. This ash represents a seemingly final death for all species of the world. Yet, this mixture is then placed in the spring water, known once again as the Mayim Chayim, the living waters. These living waters hint to the fact that there is a soul, and it suggests that there is something impervious to death. More than that, when those living waters are mixed together with the dead ash, it creates a new substance, the purification waters, which has the power to purify others who have come in touch with death. This idea conveys the resurrection of the dead, Techiyat HaMeitim. Life is not a one-way street to an infinite and final death. Rather, life is an ebb and flow through stages of existence. We live, we die, but ultimately we come back, perhaps in a different form than before, but our souls will live on in some way, somehow. The Para Aduma and the purification waters begs the question that if life does go on, there must be some reason for us being here. And if we think about it enough, we'll realize that it is to serve God and to have a relationship with Him. The Beit HaMikdash is the ultimate place to connect to God, and therefore one's desire for the Beit HaMikdash is, in a way, his expression of wanting a fuller life experience. It's precisely through this purification process that one merits to approach the Mikdash, and it is precisely through this lens of seeing the world that we may merit to see the building and service of the Beit HaMikdash, the third temple. May it be soon in our days. Have a wonderful Shabbat.